If you ate exactly what Jesus ate for 30 days, your body would change in ways that modern medicine can now explain. This is not speculation. The foods Jesus ate are recorded in the Bible, confirmed by archaeology, and backed by nutritional science. And when you put them together into one diet, the results are remarkable. Before we go further, if you are new here, subscribe right now. This channel covers things the church rarely talks about, and you do not want to miss what is coming next. The first thing to understand is that Jesus was Jewish. He lived in first century Galilee, and his diet followed the patterns of a working-class man in that region. He was not wealthy. He did not eat at feasts every day. His food was simple, seasonal, local, and deeply connected to the land of Israel. The Gospel of Luke, chapter 24, gives us one of the clearest windows into what Jesus ate after his resurrection. He asked his disciples for something to eat, and they gave him a piece of broiled fish. He took it and ate it in front of them. This is significant because Jesus chose fish. Not meat, not bread alone, fish. The Gospel of Matthew, chapter 14, records Jesus feeding 5,000 people with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. That combination, bread and fish, was the standard diet of the Galilean working class. It was not a miracle of exotic food. It was a miracle multiplied from everyday food. The Gospel of John, chapter 21, shows Jesus cooking fish over a charcoal fire on the shore of the Sea of Galilee after the resurrection. He invited the disciples to breakfast, and he had already laid out bread and fish for them. This was morning food, practical food, the kind of food a Galilean man knew how to prepare. Beyond fish and bread, the historical record and the scriptures give us a clear picture of what Jesus would have eaten regularly: olives and olive oil, figs, dates, grapes and raisins, lentils, chickpeas, barley, wheat, honey, wild herbs like hyssop and mint, occasionally goat or lamb at feast times, and water, wine, and sometimes diluted vinegar as common drinks. The Gospel of Luke, chapter 15, mentions the fatted calf being prepared for a celebration, which tells you that meat was eaten at special occasions, not daily. The everyday diet was plant-heavy, grain-based, and built around fish when available. This is the framework. Now let us go through each food one by one, and then we will look at what happens to your body when you eat this way for 30 days. Bread was the foundation of Jesus' diet, but the bread Jesus ate was nothing like modern white bread. It was dense, whole grain, slow fermented bread made from emmer, wheat, or barley. Both of those grains have a nutritional profile that modern refined flour cannot match. Barley bread in particular was the bread of the poor. It was high in beta-glucan, which is a soluble fiber that slows the absorption of glucose into the blood. When you eat barley bread, your blood sugar does not spike the way it does with white bread. It rises slowly and comes down slowly. This matters significantly for long-term heart health and daily energy stability. The Gospel of John, chapter 6, records Jesus multiplying barley loaves, not wheat loaves. That detail matters. Barley was cheaper, denser, and more filling per unit than wheat. Jesus and the people around him ate barley regularly because it was what they had access to. Emmer wheat, also common in that region, has higher protein content than modern wheat varieties. It also contains more zinc, iron, and magnesium. These minerals support immune function, oxygen transport in the blood, and muscle recovery. The bread of that era was typically fermented using natural wild yeast cultures, similar to modern sourdough. Fermentation breaks down phytic acid, which is a compound in grains that blocks mineral absorption. So fermented grain bread allows your body to absorb more minerals than unfermented bread does. The fermentation process also lowers the glycemic response even further. Jesus referred to himself as the bread of life in the Gospel of John, chapter 6, telling the crowd that he is the true bread that came down from heaven. He chose bread as the metaphor for himself, because bread was not just food, it was life itself in that culture. And Jesus chose this most essential, most humble food to represent who he is. If you replaced modern refined bread with whole grain, slow fermented barley, or emmer bread for 30 days, your gut microbiome would begin shifting within the first week. The fiber feeds beneficial bacteria in your colon. Bloating that comes from processed bread would reduce. And because your blood sugar would stabilize, your energy throughout the day would become more consistent. Fish was the protein of the Galilean diet, and Jesus was surrounded by it. The Sea of Galilee was one of the most productive freshwater fisheries in the ancient world. Several of Jesus' disciples were professional fishermen. Peter, Andrew, James, and John all worked on that lake. Fish was not an occasional food for them, it was daily. The fish of the Sea of Galilee included tilapia, sardines, and various carp species. Sardines in particular were often preserved in salt and distributed throughout the region. Salted preserved fish was a common food that traveled well and kept for weeks. Fresh tilapia contains significant amounts of protein, selenium, phosphorus, and B vitamins. Selenium supports thyroid function and acts as an antioxidant. Phosphorus is critical for bone density and energy metabolism. B vitamins, particularly B12, support the nervous system and the production of red blood cells. Sardines, when eaten whole, including the small bones, provide calcium at levels comparable to dairy. They also contain omega-3 fatty acids, which reduce systemic inflammation in the body. Chronic inflammation is now understood to be a root factor in heart disease, type 2 diabetes, autoimmune conditions, and cognitive decline. Eating sardines consistently is one of the most efficient ways to reduce inflammatory markers in the blood. The omega-3 content in the fish Jesus ate would have supported brain function, reduced joint stiffness, and lowered triglycerides. These are the same effects that modern cardiologists now recommend fish oil supplements to achieve. Jesus got them from actual fish, cooked simply, eaten regularly. The Gospel of Luke, chapter 5, describes Jesus instructing Simon Peter to cast his net into the deep water. After a night of catching nothing, Peter obeyed, and the net filled with so many fish that it began to tear. Jesus had intimate knowledge of the fishermen's world, their struggles, their methods, and their food. He met them where they were. If you ate fish 4 to 5 times per week for 30 days, your omega-3 index in your blood would measurably increase. Your joints would feel less stiff in the morning. Your focus and working memory would sharpen, and your cardiovascular markers would improve. Olive oil was the cooking fat, the lamp fuel, the medicine, and the ceremonial oil of the ancient Jewish world. Jesus grew up in a culture saturated with olive oil in every dimension of life. The Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus prayed on the night before his crucifixion, takes its name from a Hebrew word meaning oil press. It was a garden of olive trees, a place where olives were crushed to produce oil. Jesus chose to spend one of the most critical nights of his life in a garden defined by that process. Olives are a source of monounsaturated fat, particularly oleic acid. Oleic acid reduces LDL cholesterol, supports the integrity of blood vessel walls, and has anti-inflammatory effects at the cellular level. Extra virgin olive oil also contains a compound called oleocanthal, which functions in the body similarly to ibuprofen. It inhibits the same inflammatory enzymes, but without the gastrointestinal side effects associated with long-term drug use. People who consume olive oil daily have lower rates of cardiovascular disease, lower rates of certain cancers, and lower rates of neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's disease. In a diet that was already low in processed sodium, adding regular olive consumption would further protect cardiovascular health. In the parable of the 10 virgins in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25, the wise virgins kept extra oil in their lamps, while the foolish ones ran out. Jesus used oil as a metaphor for readiness and preparation. precisely because oil was something every person in that culture understood as essential. If you consume 2 to 3 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil daily for 30 days, you would likely see a reduction in CRP, which is a key marker of inflammation measured in blood tests. Your skin would show improved moisture retention. And research consistently shows that people who adopt olive oil as their primary fat experience improvements in mood and cognitive clarity within 3 to 4 weeks. Figs appear throughout the Bible more than any other fruit. Jesus cursed a fig tree in the Gospel of Mark chapter 11 when it bore no fruit. He used the fig tree in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 24 as a sign of the end times. Figs were so woven into the culture of Israel that they functioned as a national symbol of blessing and prosperity. Fresh figs are high in natural sugars, but they also contain significant fiber, which slows the absorption of those sugars. They are one of the highest plant sources of calcium, making them important for bone health in a diet that did not include large amounts of dairy. They also contain magnesium, potassium, and vitamin K. Dried figs, which were common in Jesus' time because they preserved well without refrigeration, are even more concentrated in these nutrients. They were carried as travel food and eaten as a quick source of energy during long journeys. Figs also contain phycin, a proteolytic enzyme that assists the digestive system in breaking down proteins. And the potassium in figs supports healthy blood pressure by helping blood vessels relax. Dates were abundant in the Jordan Valley and in the Jericho region, which Jesus passed through multiple times during his ministry. When Jesus entered Jericho in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 19, and called Zacchaeus down from the sycamore tree, he was in a city surrounded by date palms. Date palms were so iconic in Judea that the Romans put them on coins minted to commemorate their conquest of the region. Dates are approximately 80% carbohydrate by weight, with the majority being natural sugars alongside substantial fiber. For people doing physical work in a hot climate, dates provided fast, reliable energy without the digestive burden of heavier foods. Dates contain more potassium per serving than bananas. They are also a meaningful source of magnesium, which is required for more than 300 enzymatic reactions in the human body, including those involved in energy production, muscle contraction, and blood sugar regulation. Research has shown that eating dates daily for 4 weeks does not significantly spike blood sugar in healthy people, because the fiber content slows the rate of sugar absorption. This makes dates a practical energy food for people who need sustained physical output, exactly the population that Jesus and his followers represented. Dates also contain antioxidants, including flavonoids, carotenoids, and phenolic acid. These compounds reduce oxidative stress in the body. Oxidative stress is a key driver of aging at the cellular level and a contributing factor to chronic disease. People in 1st century Galilee who ate dates regularly were receiving these compounds as a standard part of their diet without knowing the biochemical reasons why. Wine was the primary drink of the ancient Jewish world, and Jesus participated in it. He turned water into wine at the wedding at Cana in the Gospel of John chapter 2. At the Last Supper, recorded in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 26, he took the cup of wine and said it was his blood of the covenant. Wine was a regular part of meals and of worship. Raisins are a dense source of iron, important for people doing physical labor. Iron is required for hemoglobin production, and without adequate iron, the body cannot transport oxygen efficiently. Raisins also provide boron, a trace mineral that supports bone density and improves brain electrical activity in ways that enhance memory and attention. Grape skins contain resveratrol, a polyphenol studied extensively for cardiovascular protection. Resveratrol activates proteins in the cell called sirtuins, which regulate aging processes and protect DNA from oxidative damage. Consistent daily consumption over time provides cumulative benefit. In the Gospel of John, chapter 15, Jesus calls himself the true vine and says, His Father is the gardener. He tells his disciples they are the branches, and that a branch separated from the vine cannot bear fruit. Jesus chose the vine, the source of grapes, wine, and all the nourishment and celebration that came with them as the image for his relationship with his followers. Lentils appear early in the biblical record. In the book of Genesis, Esau sold his birthright to Jacob for a bowl of lentil stew. That story tells you how significant lentils were as food. By Jesus' time, lentils, chickpeas, and other legumes were staple proteins for people who could not eat meat daily. They were cheap, stored well, and were filling. Lentils are one of the most complete plant protein sources available. They contain folate, iron, manganese, and phosphorus. Folate is critical for DNA synthesis and repair, which matters for every cell in the body. Chickpeas contain resistant starch, which passes through the small intestine undigested and reaches the colon intact. There it is fermented by bacteria and produces short-chain fatty acids, particularly butyrate. Butyrate is the preferred energy source for the cells lining your colon. It reduces inflammation in the gut, protects against colon cancer, and supports the integrity of the intestinal barrier. When the gut barrier is compromised, bacteria and undigested particles can pass into the bloodstream, triggering systemic immune responses connected to conditions ranging from autoimmune disease to depression and anxiety. John the Baptist, whose ministry Jesus affirmed, ate wild honey in the wilderness. The Gospel of Matthew chapter 3 tells us he survived on locusts and wild honey. Honey was a common food in the culture, used medicinally and culinarily throughout the ancient world. Raw honey contains hydrogen peroxide, which gives it antimicrobial properties. It also contains enzymes, flavonoids, and antioxidants that vary depending on the plants the bees collected from. Modern research has validated the ancient uses of honey for wound care, sore throats, and digestive complaints. Manuka honey is now used in clinical wound dressings for burn patients and diabetic ulcers. In the Psalms, which Jesus would have known and sung, honey is used repeatedly as a metaphor for something both sweet and nourishing. The Word of God is described as sweeter than honey from the honeycomb. The physical reality of honey, that it is both delicious and healing, made it a natural language for the deepest spiritual goods. The Passover meal, which Jesus celebrated with his disciples at the Last Supper, included bitter herbs as a required element. The book of Exodus instructs the Israelites to eat the Passover lamb with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. By the time of Jesus, the bitter herbs used included endive, chicory, wild lettuce, and horseradish. Bitter herbs are among the most nutritionally powerful plants in any traditional diet. They contain compounds that stimulate bile production in the liver, improve fat digestion, and increase the secretion of digestive enzymes in the pancreas. When you eat bitter greens before or with a meal, your digestive system is primed to break down and absorb everything that follows more efficiently. Chicory contains inulin, Pa, a soluble fiber that is one of the most powerful prebiotics known. Inulin selectively feeds lactobacillus and bifidobacterium species in the gut, which are the bacteria most consistently associated with mental health, immune function, and a healthy metabolism. Hyssop is mentioned in the Gospel of John, chapter 19, where it is used to lift a sponge of sour wine to Jesus on the cross. Hyssop has antifungal, antiviral, and expectorant properties. Consuming it as a food or infusion would have supported respiratory health in a culture where people cooked over open fires regularly. Mint was used in the diet and mentioned in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 23, where Jesus criticizes the Pharisees for tithing even their mint and dill while neglecting justice and mercy. The fact that they tithed mint tells you it was grown, valued, and used in everyday life. Mint contains menthol, which relaxes the muscles of the gastrointestinal tract and reduces spasms. It is still used today as a treatment for irritable bowel syndrome. Now, let us put this all together. If you followed the diet of Jesus' whole grain fermented bread, fish 4 to 5 times per week, olives and olive oil daily, figs and dates as your primary sweet food, lentils and chickpeas as your main plant protein, raw honey in small amounts, and bitter herbs with meals, here is what the research tells us would happen. In the first week, your gut microbiome would begin to shift. The combination of prebiotic fiber from barley, chickpeas, figs, and chicory would feed beneficial bacterial populations that are starved in most modern diets. You would likely experience some increase in gas during this phase, which is normal and is a sign that bacteria are fermenting the new fiber. By the end of the first week, bloating would decrease and bowel regularity would improve. Your blood sugar patterns would also stabilize in the first week. Replacing refined carbohydrates with whole barley bread and legumes reduces the glycemic load of every meal. You would stop experiencing the energy crashes that follow high sugar, high processed carb meals. In the second week, your inflammatory markers would begin to fall. The omega-3 fatty acids from fish, the oleocanthal from olive oil, and the antioxidants from figs, grapes, and honey work on different pathways to reduce inflammation. You would likely notice this as reduced joint stiffness, particularly in the morning. Your brain function would begin to shift in the second and third week. The omega-3 fatty acids from fish, particularly EPA and DHA, are incorporated into the cell membranes of neurons. As this occurs, the efficiency of electrical signaling between brain cells improves. People who increase omega-3 intake consistently report better focus, improved mood stability, and faster recall. These are structural changes in the brain's cellular composition, not a placebo effect. By the third week, your cholesterol profile would be shifting. The beta-glucan from barley reduces LDL cholesterol by binding to bile acids in the digestive tract and pulling them out of circulation. The liver then pulls LDL from the blood to make new bile acids, which lowers LDL levels. The olive oil maintains HDL cholesterol levels. The net result is a more favorable ratio of protective to harmful cholesterol. By day 30, your gut microbiome would have established a meaningfully different composition than it had when you started. 30 days is enough time to establish a new dominant bacterial profile that, if the diet continues, will maintain itself. Your body weight would likely decrease without any intentional caloric restriction. The fiber content of this diet is so high that satiety is achieved with fewer calories than a typical modern diet provides. Studies on Mediterranean and whole food plant-forward diets consistently show passive caloric reduction in participants who simply eat the prescribed foods to fullness. Your liver function markers would improve. The combination of olive oil's protective effects on liver cells, the fiber pulling out excess cholesterol, and the elimination of ultra-processed foods and refined sugar removes the primary drivers of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Many people with mild to moderate fatty liver see measurable improvement in liver enzyme levels within 30 days of dietary change. And here is something the science touches on that goes beyond what can be fully measured. People who eat this way consistently report a different relationship with food, not an obsessive one, not a restrictive one, a calmer one. Food becomes nourishment rather than entertainment or comfort. The flavors of whole, simple foods become more vivid as the palate adjusts away from the artificial intensity of processed food. A fig becomes genuinely sweet. Olive oil becomes rich in a way you can distinguish. Fish tastes clean and satisfying rather than bland. When you eat the way God created food to be eaten, whole, simple, fermented when appropriate, and seasoned with herbs from the earth, your relationship with appetite changes. You eat when you are hungry. You stop when you are full. The signal and response system that governs eating, which is deeply disrupted in modern populations, begins to repair itself. There is something important to say that is not about biochemistry. Every food on this list appears in the Bible, not just as food, but as a symbol of God's provision. Bread represents life and the presence of Jesus himself. Fish represents the abundance of God's provision and the humility of everyday sustenance. Olives represent anointing and the Holy Spirit. Figs represent the covenant and the expectation of fruitfulness. Grapes represent joy and the blood of Christ. Honey represents the sweetness of God's word. When you eat these foods, you are eating the same things that Jesus put in his body. You are eating what the disciples ate when they walked with him. There is something in that which science cannot fully quantify, but which is real. Jesus said in the Gospel of John chapter 6 that he is the bread of life, and that whoever comes to him will not go hungry. He made that statement after feeding thousands of people with actual bread and fish. The physical and the spiritual were not separate for Jesus. He fed people physically before he spoke to them about eternal things. He understood that a hungry body and a hungry spirit are both real. You do not have to do this perfectly. Start with the foods that are easiest to access. Replace your refined bread with sourdough, whole wheat, or barley bread. Add 1 meal of fish per week, then 2, then 4. Use extra virgin olive oil instead of seed oils. Add figs or dates as your sweet food instead of refined sugar. Eat a handful of chickpeas or lentils at lunch several times per week. Add bitter greens to your meals. You do not need to import ancient grain varieties or reconstruct a first-century kitchen. The foods themselves are available in every grocery store. The principle is simple. Eat whole, unprocessed food that comes from the earth, seasoned with herbs, built around fish and legumes, using olive oil as your fat, and sweetened with fruit and honey. There is no supplement stack, no engineered protein powder, no pharmaceutical that produces the range of positive effects that this diet produces in combination. The human body was designed for these foods. Your gut bacteria evolved alongside these foods. Your metabolic systems are calibrated for whole grains, fish, olive oil, legumes, and fresh fruit. Modern disease rates are what they are in large part because we have walked away from exactly this way of eating. There is something that does not fit neatly into a biochemistry explanation, but people who have tried this for extended periods often mention it. When you remove the clutter of processed food and replace it with food that is simple and clean, many people report a kind of mental clarity that they describe as difficult to explain. Some say their prayer life changed because they felt less foggy and more present. Some say that what they thought were spiritual or emotional problems turned out to have a significant physical component that shifted when their diet changed. The body and the spirit are not fully separate systems. What you feed one affects the other. Jesus knew this. He fed people before he taught them. He used food as the vehicle for some of his most important signs and metaphors. He ate with people as an act of communion, of presence, of love. The diet of Jesus was not exotic. It was not elaborate. It was barley bread, fish, olive oil, figs, dates, lentils, chickpeas, honey, and herbs. It was whole food, grown in a specific land, prepared simply, eaten in community. Modern nutritional science has now confirmed that this pattern of eating is among the most health-promoting dietary patterns ever studied. It reduces cardiovascular disease. It reduces inflammation. It improves gut health. It supports brain function. It protects against metabolic disease. And it is exactly what the Son of God chose to eat while he walked the earth. That is not a coincidence. It is a clue. And if you follow that clue for 30 days, your body will tell you whether it is true. Jesus lived this diet not as a discipline, but as a way of life. It was ordinary food, eaten with grateful people, in a land where every fruit and grain was understood as a gift from God. That combination of simplicity, gratitude, and nutritional wisdom is something you can bring into your own life starting today. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to help us grow and spread Jesus.